Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jay Frost, and if you're new to this, this is the Philanthropy Mastermind series, brought to you, of course, by our friends at DonorSearch. You won't hear much about DonorSearch today, so I definitely want to give them a big shout out, not just of thanks, but to direct you to their site where you can find out all about your donors, everything you'd ever want to know. So if you're not familiar with their services, I hope you'll check them out. And while you're there, you can also look under the resources tab, where a recording of this session, as well as many of the other sessions in the Philanthropy Mastermind series, are housed, or there are links to the YouTube page that DonorSearch maintains with a lot of the past content. So once again, that's at donorsearch.net. And I'll do another shout out at the end for those who missed this little preamble to make sure that you can look for that content and then share it with your colleagues, because you'll definitely want to do that with today's program and Thursdays, which I'll tell you about in a moment. Both, of course, provided by our friend Randall Hallett, who's here on the screen with us. Randall is probably known to you already, but if you don't know his work, I'll give you just the briefest of thumbnail sketches and then get out of his way so he can talk with you today about, of course, fundraising in an inflationary period. One of two sessions that he is kind enough to provide for us this week, that one and then one on Thursday on planned giving in a down market. And if those two things seem to dovetail, it's because, well, of course they do. And both of the sessions are really important. So we hope not only that you'll enjoy today's, but also enjoy Thursdays as well and share it with your colleagues. One last final note before I do the proper introduction, which is that you have two things, two ways you can interact today. One, of course, is the chat. So I want to encourage you right now to go into the chat and just say hello. If you just say hello, it'd be really helpful to our presenter to let him know that you're here, maybe where you're coming in from, where you go big red, which institution you're with, whatever you feel like saying. Just set that up so that he's aware that you're here, living, breathing, and ready for action. And if you want to use that as a conversational tool amongst yourselves, please do. I really encourage that. Additionally, we have, of course, the old-fashioned Q&A. Please use that for your questions. We'll store those up and then, of course, provide those to our presenter. So at the conclusion of his presentation today, he can tackle those questions. So once again, chat over here, questions over there. Please use both. And now, of course, the proper introduction to the great, the one and only Randall Hallett. And Randall has been in the field as, of course, a major presence for fundraising in general, and especially, I would say, for healthcare. That's not all he does, but especially in that sphere for a long time. He has multiple degrees. He jokes often about being one of the most educated people in the sector, which is a remarkable thing. We have a lot of people here who know a lot. He's among the very top echelon of that, with an educational doctorate and, of course, a Juris Doctor degree, so he knows both the legal and the business. He's put his hands into the midst of fundraising at major institutions across the country, both as a CDO, then at Goebel, and finally, of course, with his own practice today. So he'll tell you, I'm sure, all about that in the stories he weaves to tackle the subject of fundraising in an inflationary period. So with that, I want to turn the baton over to Randall Hallett.
Well, Jay, thank you. At least a third of what you said is true, and I appreciate that third. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you for weighing in on from all the different places that you are joining us, and I'm going to share the screen, and we'll make sure that we get you all the information you need in terms of inflation and what's going on. And it's a very interesting and challenging time that we're having to deal with. In my 25 years that I've been doing this, having started my career near the dot-com bubble, lived through the Great Recession, nothing has touched our organizations like what we're dealing with now. I tell people that, from someone who enjoys both macro and microeconomics, that, and I think about, and Jay's right, I weave a lot of my personal life and experiences into the conversations I have. My wife, who's the better 7/8 of who we are and been married now for 22 plus years, she's a classically trained musician, and economics and finance is just not her thing. As this period of inflation was beginning to develop, she asked, kind of as we do after we put our kids to bed, what are my thoughts? And I said, inflation is one of the great fears of economies, that because we haven't seen it, felt it in high levels in 40, 50 years, it's forgotten. We read about it in places like South American countries or African countries where inflation takes off, inflation eats from the bottom up. And that has a dramatic effect on what we do in the nonprofit sector. And it's affecting what we are looking at on a daily basis. And so my hope today is to give you some tools, tactical things that you can do in this process. Part of it is what we control as what I would think of as gift officers. Part of it is what we're looking at and dealing with as we think about as maybe leadership and how we align with our organization. Some of it is annual giving, but all of it's going to be about how we can hopefully stabilize the philanthropy that we need in our communities through the nonprofits that you and I and others represent. Jay mentioned Hallett Philanthropy. Just a couple of quick things. I do a lot of different things. I have clients all over the world. I'm very fortunate. I am one of the few people, and I hope you are joining me as a part of the few, who gets up every morning and looks in the mirror and says, doggone it, I'm lucky to do what I do. I love what I do. I come here to my little office about 2 miles away from my house because I love working with individuals and clients who make the world a better place. And at the essence, that's what philanthropy is. It's not about the money. It's about love of mankind, helping others, making a difference. And if there's nothing else that I can impart to you is what you're doing, even if you're frustrated today, there's maybe a boss that's a challenge, or maybe a donor who didn't do what maybe you thought, or someone in the office who's causing some consternation. Don't underestimate the value that you deliver every day as a nonprofit employee, leader, someone who's executing the needs and bringing to bear the resources for the needs of your community. Jay also was nice enough to mention education. I am a lifelong learner, and I'm beginning at 52 to push more and more into that, is the idea that we all should be learning. If you're satisfied with what you know, then I can't help you. We all should be trying, and you joining this today is one piece of evidence that you're not. Find a way that you can learn. I choose to do this podcast every week that's 20 minutes. And it's not an advertisement. We don't even talk really about Hallett Philanthropy. What it is each individual 20-minute podcast is a lesson, something I've learned, something I've read about, something that's troubling a client, something that I've realized, something that I've researched. But really, each one ends with what are the 3, 4, 5, 7 tactical things of this issue that you can apply to your world in the nonprofit sector. And you can listen to it going home, coming to work. I have a marketing person who said, we'll put it on YouTube under Hallett Philanthropy so you can watch it. I'm not sure I didn't really advise that to anybody, but you can download it on any one of the podcasting areas, Apple, Downcast, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever. I also write a lot. In fact, just before coming on here, I wrote the next several blogs. These are 90-second reads. Again, education, challenging. What is it that you can learn from other people? And if you don't like what I write, or you don't like the podcasts I do, I'm okay with that. Go find somebody else. Find something that challenges the long-term and short-term planning that you need to do to be better for your organization. What are we going to talk about? Well, we're going to talk about being mentally ready in all of this. What does it mean that we need to do, and what's going on overall? And then the why. What are we talking about in terms of what's happening? We're also going to deal with how to deal with the inflationary times, starting with focus and pipeline and portfolio, and what the latest research says. And then how to tactically deal with inflation. And then in the end, we're going to talk about what you need in terms of techniques. So let's start with this bigger picture, this getting mentally ready and what's happening is that we're getting more and more people who are pushing back, obviously, on our philanthropy. And we're dealing in this crazy moment where we have two competing economic interests. So the why is our communities and nonprofits need it. What's happening is this challenge of a bear market and fear of future bear market issues that are on top of or in addition to inflation. And this has not happened in a very long time, going back into the 1970s. And we barely were tracking data in the nonprofit world, kind of the way Giving USA does a fantastic job. we weren't even tracking the numbers in that level of detail. So we don't even have very good evidence as to what was going on. What we can derive from it is that these competing interests are really the two conversations I'm very blessed and appreciative to be asked to talk about. Today will be inflation. On Thursday, we'll talk about planned giving in a bear market. And there are techniques for this. There are opportunities for you to better understand what can happen in terms of how to align planned giving when the market's crazy and actually going down. There are advantages if you know what techniques they are. And I have realized after 25 years, I spent 3 years of law school studying a lot of different parts of law, but had a real emphasis in taxation of gifts, estates, and trusts. And I've come to appreciate that here recently, and that's what we're going to focus on Thursday. Today, we want to talk about what's going on in the families that you're dealing with for your nonprofit. And this is who we're kind of angling at. We have people, and if you're in California, you might want to add maybe not a whole zero, but it may be a little more. But our best pipeline over the past 15 or 20 years has been, in terms of growth, is a family making somewhere, north of $300,000, south of $700,000. And those become our new major gift donors or our repeat major gift donors. These are the people that we want to convey and convince and align with in terms of our mission. They become our financial supporters. And over this period of time, as we have, and the data shows, concentrated more and more on major gifts in terms of a return on investment, their life has begun to change in the last year, and pretty dramatically. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on in households. And by the way, this probably will make sense to your household. In regular times, somebody making $500,000, let's say, is probably bringing home about $350,000. So maybe $150,000 in taxes if we just kind of roll it all up into one, and we'll make it just an easy synopsis. And then they have expenses that are based on what they can spend. And I kind of break them down as you go down the list into hard and discretionary expenses. Hard expenses, the way I kind of define it, is your house payment, car payment, maybe your child's private education or child's college. They're needs that are pretty locked in. Throw in groceries and gas and all these other things. And then there's 50% that's discretionary. So basically what we're saying is that as a part of these hard expenses, and I would also include like retirement savings, are, somewhere about $150,000. And then there's discretionary, meaning they can spend it on whatever they want. Maybe they want to do increased retirement. Maybe they want to belong to the country club. Maybe they want to do other things, but one of those things is usually some type of charity. And what we know is those at the top are making the biggest difference. So if we assume that they're giving 10 to 15% away as an estimation, they're giving $46,000, and that's part of their discretionary choice. This was in regular times. What's happening now? When you add in inflation into this, the base stays the same. They're making $500,000. Taxes are generically about the same. But the way they spend their discretionary income, whether hard or soft, changes dramatically. All of a sudden, when you start adding a 10% inflationary rate, the money that they had before is worth 10% less. So you can say things are 10% more expensive, or you can say they have 10% less money. So all of a sudden, that $335,000 to $350,000 that was discretionary or available is down to $300,000. But the hard expenses don't change. They still have the house payment. They still have the groceries. They still have the car payment. They still have the kid's private school. They still have a kid in college. What gets squeezed is that discretionary. And by the way, if you think they're going to decrease their vacation or their country club membership over their charity choices, you're wrong. They're not going to. Most will not. What gets squeezed is charity. And what we have then is a situation where they still want and desire to be generous, but there's greater competition for those limited dollars. They're not going to give as much to all of those organizations that they are normally giving to. There are harder choices. And then this happens. If you don't know who this is, you should. That's Jerome Powell. He's the chair of the Fed. He gets up and he starts talking. And normally when he gets up, talks, interest rates are going up as the Fed drives financial policy that's hoping to push down inflation. And generally, after he talks, we have a decrease in the stock market. Maybe not the same day, but this is part of this economic in the stock market. You can look at the Dow Jones, S&P. Those are indicators of where they think business is going. We're down over the last 7-8 months. It was at about 36.5, 37,000. We're down to 32 or so. It dropped to about 29, depending on the election and the last 3/4 of a point raise in the interest rates. They think that there's a challenge coming in terms of the markets. And what that does is it puts a limit on people's assets. They start watching their stock portfolios more often. So if we go all the way back to that family, they start getting worried and they spend less. And they begin to conserve resources even further beyond inflation. And that means that people start making more radical choices. Businesses start making these choices. Individuals start making these choices. So if we take this family that is operating on this kind of general paradigm of 500,000, just as a kind of a really nice opportunity for any nonprofit, and we add in inflation, and then we add in Jerome Powell, and we add in a bear market and uncertain times coming, and all of a sudden these families begin to change what they do. Again, the base stays the same. Taxes really haven't changed at all. But what we know is that people are beginning to save additional money for uncertain times. I know I'm amongst them. I'm a little more careful with what I'm spending. We're putting a little extra away. And all of a sudden, that money that was that 335 to 350,000 that dropped to 305,000 in terms of being able to be spent over a year, so $25,000 a month, all of a sudden is being decreased even more as savings gets increased, as people are making sure that they have enough resources in their businesses and companies. And these hard expenses now have jumped to 60% of what they have. Discretionary dollars begin to continue that decrease. And who's left out? We are. People will choose the hard expenses, the vacations, the kids' colleges, the private schools, keeping that new car that they purchased in the middle of the pandemic when costs were at their highest. They'll keep all of those, their status symbols. And what gets squeezed is the nonprofit world. Once you begin to put someone, even if you think, well, that's a lot of money, you begin to put this kind of example into place, you begin to understand people's mentality. And when you understand their mentality, then you can drive toward what you can do to better place your nonprofit. The number one thing I'm telling clients, and I think the number one thing the numbers show, is the most important thing you can do is focus. Creating focus on who are the most important people in your nonprofit's world when it comes to funding. And there are some global numbers that I give all the credit to in terms of Giving USA that are helping guide us. What we know is that the percentage of households giving to philanthropy at all is seeing a dramatic decrease. That in 2002 and 3, 2/3 of the households in the United States were making a charitable gift. We're now under 50%. On top of that, when we look at how families are spending their disposable income in their own homes, we are at the lowest point in our history because people are concerned about what's coming next. I see a lot of people who see these numbers and they go, oh my goodness, we need to change what we're doing and we need to concentrate more as a nonprofit on corporations and foundations. I had a conversation this morning with a client who says, gosh, there seems to be a lot of jobs out there for corporations and foundations, but we're not looking to make that move. And I said, I actually agree with you. Let's go back to the Giving USA numbers. This is the 2020, the 2021 numbers. I probably should have thrown those in here. Haven't changed all that much. So this is going to be a good exercise. But this is what Giving USA tells us as to who is giving our philanthropic dollars. And the biggest amount are individuals at 69%. So the majority of dollars coming in gifts are coming from individuals, but the arrow shows you up towards bequests. Well, charitable gifts in planned giving, again, we'll talk about this on Thursday. Those are made by individuals. So actually, we should add these together. I think one of the greatest growth areas that we see are foundations. And the greatest growth in foundation giving is through donor-advised funds through community foundations. For the most part, who's making those decisions? Individuals. When I talk about focus at the high end, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have opportunities in corporations and foundations. But if you're leveraging only your future in those areas or overplaying the percentage of resources you have, people, certainly effort, most important resources, time, into non-individuals, you're making a mistake. The numbers tell us that the most important area for us is still individuals. The challenge is how we're going to get to them in this process. And to do that, we have to begin to focus. And we have to begin to realize that we have limited time and limited resources. People are struggling, and we got to know who are the people that are the most likely to help us. On the left is a chart where you have the number of donors, where they're the largest at the bottom for our lapsed and non-donors, and then you move up, obviously, towards our major gifts. And on the right is the dollars, i.e., our highest dollars are at the top. When I began my career 25 years ago, we operated under what's called the Pareto principle. Pareto was an Italian business owner and economist who talked about the fact that 20% of your success 80% of your success comes from 20% of your labor. Meaning that if you concentrated more on that 20% that was highly effective and efficient, you would actually increase your output. And in our world, we've equated that. The very first conference I ever attended, a case conference back in 1997, went to a session, and this was what they talked about. 80% of our dollars come from 20% of our people. That Pareto principle is dead. Doesn't exist anymore. What we know is that 95% of our donors are making 5% of the gifts or dollars to our nonprofits on average. And that 4% are making 25% of the dollars available. And it's the 1% that is driving 70% of the gifts. Remember, I showed you a chart that indicated that the number of donors or households giving has seen a precipitous drop from 2/3 to under 1/2. So we have less people giving, but there's more dollars out there. We've seen an increase every year. This is macroeconomics, supply and demand. You have more dollars from fewer people, which means the competition is greater. We live in a world where Pareto has moved into, because I love Jay Frost, the Frost methodology of 95-5. 5% of our donors are making up 95% of our gifts. If you look at the Giving USA numbers for this last year, There was an increase in the number of dollars year over year. But when you take into account inflation, it actually diminished by just a little less than 1% of of overall giving in GDP. I think that number is going to jump dramatically when we get the numbers from Giving USA in June and July of next year. Focus is about figuring out how in the world do we work with, communicate with, deal with, integrate with, bring on board with. Those are the most likely. And now I'm going to start jumping into some of the tactical. Some of you might be thinking, well, we got to widen the number of people we talk to. I would argue just the opposite. So I want to give credit where credit's due. I'm going to show you 3 different studies that I think back this philosophy. Again, if I go all the way back to 1997, I sat through that first case conference, and there was some session on the size of portfolios, and I was told, well, your portfolio should be 125 to 150 people, or everyone in the room was told. And I'm a math nerd. And I went up to the person and said, that's great. Where'd you get the number? And they said, well, that's industry standard. I said, well, I heard that. How did you come up with the number? Industry standard, best practice. That's all I could ever get. And it wasn't until about 2015 that I finally heard someone do the kind of research that makes me happy. We could actually attribute data to a solution. And so I want to start with Northwestern and give them all the credit in the world. This is their work. I'm attributing it to them and what they've released in terms of data and success. What they began to figure out is that they needed to requalify how big portfolio sizes would be. And so what I tell my clients, based on what we're going to show you here in a second, is that your portfolio focus, who are the people closest to you, needs to be a lot smaller. And that you need to look at this as, if they're in your portfolio, you should be asking them this year, or if we're near the year end, into the beginning part of next year, it's soon, or there's a major stewardship need, i.e. someone made a 5-year pledge of $1 million per year. Yeah, they should stay in your portfolio because you want to make sure you stay close to them, make those pledge payments. Or there's special exceptions, like there's a huge upside to keeping this person. And if we do this right, this could be that 7, 8, 9-figure donor someday. And you should have had contact within the last 6 months. If you haven't been in contact with them in the last 6 months, why are they in anybody's portfolio? There's always exceptions. They're not any good. Not many of them are good anymore. When I started talking about limiting portfolio size just on my own 15, 20 years ago with my teams, they would say, well, they're on the around the world cruise. Well, that doesn't even work anymore because you can get internet on any cruise ship in the world. What kind of prospect or donor are they if you're not in contact with them on a regular basis? And lastly, using the value of the CRM, is there a formal plan? What are you doing with them? The idea is that we really want, in terms of reducing portfolio size, to eliminate challenges. This is this focus. And by the way, the people who give to you the most are the most likely you should be focusing on, because they're the ones that are most likely to stay with you when there's challenging times. We learned this during the pandemic. What did crazy people like I say during the pandemic? Get closer to your donors. Make phone calls, do Zoom calls, drop stuff off at the front door, have a cup of coffee with them, one on one side of the driveway, you on the other. Get closest to the people that are most important and believe in your mission the most. And this is no different. But we prioritize people in our database. We minimize the competition internally. We actually will see an increase, which we're going to show you, in the number of solicitations we make, and we eliminate all the waste, or at least a lot of it. Northwestern was really the first to do this. They brought in a team to help them figure out how to maximize their most important asset, their talent, their teams, and that, or those individuals' most important quality, time. What they found was that their average portfolio was 115, right about that average that I heard about in 1997. And that they figured out by looking and doing some arithmetic that 85 people out of that 115 were just uncultivated. And what they did was they forced their gift officers down into portfolios of about 40. Now, there might be some prospecting, so people might come in and out, and I call this kind of the loose 40. And in healthcare, it's, grateful patients you're trying to qualify for next year. Education, it may be a new annual fund donor who's being elevated. But what we know is portfolio sizes were dropped. What were the results? This is all about what Northwestern did. They saw dramatic increases over a two-year period with the same gift officers. No major change in campaign, no major change in economic times. They saw an increased number of asks. They saw an increased number of gifts, and they saw a dramatic increase in the total dollars they raised, because all of a sudden they were spending their time and focusing on the people that were closest to them, that were most valuable. This was the first time I saw someone actually put something in writing with data that showed that focus is critically important, and our portfolios are way too big. We're asking and thinking we're talking with too many people. We have visions of grandeur. That was the first study. The second was done several years later, and I believe in 2017-18, with a consulting group called EAB. They talked to 400 different gift officers across different platforms of the nonprofit world and asked, tell me about your portfolio and your success. And this is a scatter diagram on an XY axis that indicates what the results were. Look at the trends. Where are the most successful people in general? They're the ones with the smallest portfolios, because they're focusing on the people that are most likely to give. Where is the majority of the challenge? First, there's this yellow, but above it, there's a huge white hole, except for this one dot. I'd like to talk to the person who had 400 people in their portfolio, and they were able to raise just short of $3 million. That's a story I'd love to hear more about. But the general principle is there's this hole up here. This is the second time I began to see, wait a minute, we have evidence that shows smaller portfolios, focus is going to get us to the highest dollar relationships that we need to drive our nonprofit missions forward. And then I had, because I've been talking about this with clients, and I have different ways in which I leverage the opportunity to help build out metrics for the year with clients. I had a client who'd been through this, goes, you're not going to believe what just came out. I said, tell me more. Oh, by the way, in this case, all the tenure was about the same. There was no change in portfolio. It was all based on kind of pure data, which is really kind of interesting. The third, which just came out, and I don't even have the slide in here for, is, yes, I do. It's one here, is Blackbaud. So about 2 months ago, maybe 3 months ago, and let's give Blackbaud credit, they did an analysis of a whole lot of gift officers. And what they found is that of the standard, again, industry standard for 25 years, 120 to 150 people, that 55% were not being visited, 36 hadn't had a visit in 12 months, and 20% had no contact. And that in that same study, by reducing the number of people in portfolios, what they found is that the opportunity was hugely advantageous in terms of the ability to maximize effort. If inflation is pushing people to make fewer gifts across their choices, then you want to be in front of the people that value you the most. And it goes back to then figuring out portfolio size. Are they likely this year? Are they someone you're in regular contact with? Is there a formal plan? And the term, it's not new, that I use is bless and release. How do we let people go so we can focus on the people who are closest to us to maximize their giving? I also have a recommendation reading. Jay probably didn't even know I was going to do this. although he's not one of the authors, but he knows them very well. There's a book coming out next week from today on National Philanthropy Day called The Generosity Crisis. You can order it now on Amazon or a lot of other places, and it'll be to you as soon as it's released. Both of these individuals are good friends. I was privileged enough to read the manuscript, a really detailed, not quite final draft, but it's close, about 2 months ago. I think what they're hitting upon is something that will change the way we look at the relationships we have with our donors. That we have moved into such areas where we see transactional gifts on a regular basis instead of worrying about transformational relationships. And they call it, as you can see in the capitalization, this radical connection that we just don't have with enough people. It's hard to have great relationships when things get tough if you've got to have them with too many people. Focus is about getting to the people that are closest enough to you. Figuring out how to have a radical connection. So if you're looking for something to read over the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Hanukkah, I recommend this. It'll be worth it, having read it. I'm really incredibly proud of both Brian and Nathan and the work that they've done. I think it's really going to help us all. Let's jump then into the tactical. What are some things that you can do to help build better opportunities during inflation? The first is very much old school, but I almost hear nobody talk about it. You need dramatic alignment right now with your finance office. They hold the keys to what we need. There was an article in the Chronicle of Philanthropy probably 10 days ago that talked about that there is a moving sentiment that the cost to raise $1 is going to go up, not because of the inefficiency or ineffectiveness of fundraisers, but that the operational costs are going up and going up in a way that we can't really keep up. Some are thinking that the average cost, we talk about 25 cents on the dollar, over the next couple of years might be closer to 33 cents on the dollar, just because we're going to have to spend more money in operations. That inflation is driving issues involving labor, wages, attraction and retention of talent, just of the general things that we need. If you're a nonprofit that does mental and social health, obviously you're dependent on social and mental health professionals. They're getting paid more. Healthcare, it's nursing. Education, it's faculty, people. Maybe you've been to the grocery store. I find it fascinating. I don't do a lot of the grocery shopping, but I find it fascinating that literally anything that a human being touches in terms of cost is unbelievable. Let me give you an example. I'm sure you've experienced this, but this speaks to how we need to align with our finance office. We have a son with a very restricted diet, and one of his core foods is ham. So we've always purchased ham off the bone from the butcher or the meat store, as we call it, down the street. The cost of them cutting the meat the ham has caused it to jump. It's unbelievable. Yet if I go buy a ham and cut it myself, the cost per pound is literally less than half. So the alignment in our family's case is realization of this cost, and we're going to cut ham. Let me give you some examples. What are the actual effects that you can articulate? And we're going to get into the messaging here at the very end. So this has multiple applications. Do you know what you're raising money for? And can you communicate why there's some adjustment or change? I'm going to just jump to number 2. This came up actually this morning in a conversation. I'm helping a client with their feasibility study, and I'm beginning to ask questions. It was our internal weekly call. And I said, I haven't asked this, but what is your contingency rate on this building project? And they said, well, we don't know. I said, well, do you have the budget from, your internal finance office? And they said, yes. I said, well, why don't you pull it out? Somewhere in that budget is probably a contingency fee. Tell me what it is. And it's usually a percentage, and then it's a percentage of the total cost. And they came back and said it's 6%. And I said, you have a massive problem. I said, it needs to be 20%, because the cost of building materials is such that when you finally stick a shovel in the ground, what you think you're paying for lumber today is not going to be what it's going to be in 6, 9, 10 months. And the worst case scenario for philanthropy is we get to the point where we think we're going to build it, and all of a sudden somebody says, well, we can't afford it anymore. The only way you know that is if you're aligned with your finance office. What are they planning? What are the cost problems? What has the CEO or the CFO staying up at night? What is changing day to day? If you're a chief development officer on this call or on this presentation or seminar or education session, whatever you want to call it, if you're not in these executive meetings listening and asking for what's going on the operation side, you're creating a deficit for yourself. We have to begin to look at how the organization is going to change its revenue needs based on its operational costs. And alignment is the first piece of this. We have to be willing to adjust. And we can't adjust until we know what's going on. Second thing that we can do is all about focusing. So lower your portfolio sizes. Spend some time looking at your portfolio and saying, realistically, who are the people that are most likely to give and that can give? And it's almost like a requalifying process, because their finances are probably changing at home. Concentrate on the ones that can be the biggest difference makers, and get close to them. Over communicate with them. We'll talk about this in an annual giving perspective here in a moment. Tell them what's going on and why this is a problem for you. I sometimes think if people are so ingrained in their own family business issue or family financial issues, maybe like me, they have their own company, they don't think about the nonprofit having higher costs and why their giving is so important. And if you're being pressed to lower your budget, there's some hard conversations about, do you need to eliminate something? You have limited resources that produce income. What needs to go? And it shouldn't be what's politically easy. What's the best ROI? We know it's major gifts. We know it's planned giving. We know it's larger corporate and foundational asks. We know special events, for most special events, is cost 50% on the dollar. That's hard conversations, which means you also need to be communicating, if you have a foundation board, with them. They generally don't understand these conversations. Sit down with them and say, let me explain to you how much money we're spending on things. You also need to do your homework. You need to be able to allocate in terms of what's reasonable. If you're looking at a campaign with me, with someone else, with somebody, do a feasibility study. I'm doing, I think, 3 right now, if I think about it. The first question, at least on an individual level, I'm asking them once we kind of get through the bigger picture of the organization and the case statement is, where are they at? Is this important to them? Are they willing to engage? For donors, can you look at this and ask them to extend a pledge payment if they're having trouble making a gift? Now, this also requires alignment with your finance office, because sometimes their financial models are based on pledge periods, and 6, 7 years can be longer than they really want to go. Can you substitute planned giving for a cash contribution that may be more challenging now? Blended gifts. We're going to talk about blended gifts and planned giving again on Thursday, so I'm not going to get as much into this. You may think the last one, Randall, you're crazy. Individual stocks? Yes, there are opportunities there. So the first thing is that many people are going through what's called a rebalancing of their portfolio based on the economic trials and tribulations and what the markets are doing. And that sometimes can cause, first and foremost, a situation where they've got to sell some kind of stock that's appreciated. We're used to that, but we don't think about it. Let me give you a series of examples of stocks in the last 12 months. I'm not saying it's all of them, but if you've been in the energy sector or you have donors in the energy sector, they've seen massive growth in their stock portfolios. And if they want to rebalance, they may have to sell, which means they're going to have capital gains. Could that be an advantage to you? We'll talk about the idea of plan giving in perspective, but let me give you one other example, more long-term context. If you bought Apple in 2008, it's up something like 4,000%. Now, are they, as an individual who has a lot of Apple, as wealthy as they were 6 months ago if they haven't touched it? No. Are they a heck of a lot wealthier than they were in 2008, 7? Yes. In the last 12 months, stocks have been up and down and many have pulled back. But let's go back. The Great Recession, stock market dropped to 6,000. Before the Great Recession, it was like 16, 17,000. It's now at 32,000 as general indicators. People have made a lot of money. And so asking the question, do you have a long-term stock that's done very well that you're looking to get rid of that might be a way in which to make that gift and get rid of capital gains? Context. For prospects, and I would say for donors as well, emphasize impact. What is it that you're doing from a nonprofit perspective that's changing lives? Many times, my experience is emotion is the decision maker for what people do and why they do it in terms of their charity and their philanthropy. What is the emotional story you can tell? And sending the message that we can't wait for your gift. Your gift is critical to our success. Your engagement and involvement is the difference maker for our nonprofit to deliver its mission, to serve others. Match what they want to do with the things that you need to do to ensure that they are coming along with you on the ride as they're making choices at home, but how much charity they have. Get them in some way, shape, or form. I call it bring in the content or value expert, or bring them on site. Let them see it. Let them feel it. It's harder to say no if they've been close to the action. Want to be careful of COVID, want to make sure people are healthy. But I think the greatest thing that I've realized is that yes, philanthropy can be done and should be done using technology like we're using today. But I also would argue that the emotion diminishes when we don't have direct contact. Offer volunteer opportunities. Let them be involved on the front line. Also, the one that I think I fear the most is, well, you know, they're going through some challenges, or we think they're going through some challenges, or, you know, there might be some challenges. You know, we shouldn't ask. We don't really in this business ask for money. We offer invitations for people to join us in what we're trying to accomplish. Don't assume someone can't or won't give you money. You do it at your own peril. Our job is to offer those invitations, and those that wish to join us, we escort them and shepherd them through the process. I'll let someone else decide what they do with their money, but I'm going to make sure they know that what they're doing to help me or us or our organization is critically important. The other thing you might consider is, how do you define a major gift, which means also reevaluating metrics. Is your gift opportunities too high? Are they unreasonable? Have they gone up recently and they need to retrench a little bit? All things that can be done internally to maximize opportunity. Lastly, for the prospects, particularly, make sure that you are valuing likelihood. I'm not doing this because of Jay or DonorSearch or the Tedescos, but I am saying that things like what DonorSearch's AI does is life-saving in these kind of moments, because they're going to tell you who's more likely to give to you than less likely. And then you can overlay likelihood or capacity. Concentrate on the people who are, particularly on prospects, new donors, who are more likely, and you may need outside help to be able to do so. Blended gifts. We'll talk about that again on Thursday. Is it possible to ask people for an extra 10% in the annual giving process? A 10% increase of your largest gift could make a world of difference. And if you have enough of those, does that help you against hedging against that inflation? I also believe we're going to see longer cultivation times. I call them conversion rates. We're going to see a longer period from a person entering into our pipeline to making a gift. These people are more hesitant. They're more aware of their own financial situations. And overall, we have less people giving. From an annual giving perspective, maybe some of you are specializing in annual giving or digital mailing process or intermediate giving in terms of calls and outreach. Concentrate on those who are giving reoccurring gifts. I make a monthly gift on my credit card to the law school where I went to law school. I'm in. If you have people like that who are consistent donors, make sure that you are concentrating on them the most. Number two, when having conversations, both in annual giving and major gifts, but in particular, why is now an important time? Why have your costs gone up? Tell your most loyal donors what's going on and why that 10% could make a world of difference. And be willing to answer questions. Maybe even have a frequently asked questions section or supplemental document somewhere on your website that says, this is what we're dealing with. Be open. People who give want to know they're giving to a winner of an organization that's viable and vibrant. Tell the story that we are ahead of this. We are thinking about it. We are going to make it because we are doing good things and we're really run by good leaders. The last thing is you could do more digital and lower your costs. And I'm not the digital expert. I'm the guy without the Facebook or the Twitter or the Hulu. But what I know is that this is the future. And it's less expensive if done correctly. All in all, focus is all about reducing the number of people that you highlight, that you focus on, that are the most important individuals. And the new Pareto principle, now we're going to call the Frost principle, is 95-5. If you're not finding a way to narrow down the number of people you're trying to deal with, particularly as we know people are making less and less charitable gifts, and you're not identifying the ones that are most likely to give to you, then you're putting yourself in peril. And at the end of the day, what that's going to mean is less opportunity unless you're willing to change. If you want or need to get a hold of me, and I think we're going to get this presentation to Jay, and then I'm thinking DonorSearch or somehow can get this out, you're welcome to reach out to me. I will always love the conversations and opportunities to chat. And Jay would certainly entertain any questions. I was not watching the chat box, which is on my fourth screen over here. Because I can't do 4 things. I can only do 3 things at once. If there are any questions, I'm glad to entertain those as well.
We do have a bunch. Thank you so much, Randall. And thank you for naming a principal after me. I'm sure I didn't deserve it, but
the only principal I'm named after is the one I had to see quite often in grade school. And that was a different, spelled differently. So
That's right. No rulers here. I don't know if you had corporal punishment where you were. I didn't. But we do have a number of questions. And so if anybody else has one, please do feel free to go ahead and put this in the Q&A. We'll be here for just a few more minutes. And we want to make sure that you have a chance to participate here. But do take down Randall's information if you don't have it already, right there at hallettphilanthropy.com, so you can check out his work. Be in touch. We'll get the slide deck. We'll see about redistributing that to everyone. I hope that's something that we can do. But just in case you don't get it for any reason, I strongly recommend you also take down his email address as well as his website address. This is a man you want to follow and pay attention to. He's obviously not only very knowledgeable and experienced, but such a great educator. And I'm so grateful for everything you shared, Randall. And I hope you'll also come back, in case you missed that reference, to Thursday's session on planned giving in a down market, because while there is some obviously overlap between these issues, that's a deep dive on an issue that's going to be so important to all of us. There were a couple of comments that were made right before we get into the questions. I just want to make sure I highlight them. Tony and Carol had both talked about seeing all those numbers and how helpful they were. And I just want to echo that. It was really great to see, and I wish I had captured that and put it on Twitter. And Eli talked about how at the American Red Cross, he had a portfolio that was 800 plus people. Now, granted, that was not as an MGO, but still, that's a massive portfolio, and you addressed that so well here today. But we have a whole bunch of questions here, so let me just dive into them, and I'll just do it sequentially.
Please.
The first one was from Anonymous, who said, does the holder of a DAF ever decline what the individual or family requests for who they want to give, who they want those directed towards?
Oh, that's a loaded question. So I've been concerned about DAFs for 20 plus years. It's not that they are a terrible instrument or way in which a family or an individual can set up charity or philanthropic intent. My concern is that when, number one, there's not a sunset, which is finally being discussed, is once you put the money into that community foundation as a donor advised fund, you get the tax deduction, but there's no sunset on when you have to give that money away. And what you're seeing for the first time kind of in our industry is commentary about, hey, this doesn't seem right. Mm-hmm. And it's not. Number two is that my concern long-term is you have the relationship. If they're giving directly to you, they go to the community foundation, set up the donor advised fund. And let's say the matriarch or patriarch, your connection passes. This was their joy to give to you. All of a sudden, if there's not clear intent as to who makes the decisions thereafter, it could be children, could be a third party, what you get is a series of hurdles now that you didn't have before. And because they protect the anonymity, and I'm not arguing they shouldn't, of their donors and their intent, what you end up with is more influence by the community foundation as to where that money goes. I'm not saying it's going to bad places, but you're representing your nonprofit. And so this is a real challenge, and it's going to continue to grow because we're seeing dramatic increases in donor advised funds. And I think that's going to complicate individual relationships with couples or families and the nonprofit, as now you have somebody in the middle of the process. That just isn't going to be as clean as it was if it was one-on-one or direct.
We have another one here about your bless and release reference. You remember that?
I do.
Asking, what is the degree of contact you recommend? Is this none at all or significantly less?
So if it's in a portfolio, that means they're dropping out of that gift officer's intermediate, principal, planned, major, doesn't make a difference. They're dropping out of your portfolio. The communication that I would have, or that I recommend, is, if there's anything you ever need, I'm here. But you're going to push them back into more of a mass marketing effort. If they're not going to make a gift to you at whatever level you represent or whatever area you represent, why are you wasting time continuing to hope that they do? And this means that the ability that gift officers have to qualify is critically important. And asking the right questions. I teach a session, just an hour and a half, just on this subject. How do you qualify someone to know if you should move forward with them or bless and release them? It doesn't mean we're not here to help them, but we're not going to be kind of on the offensive side of communication. It's more reactive. And that's got to be part of the equation when we talk about focus.
We had a question from Skylar who had talked about how many organizations will have sensitive situations, so they can't do in-person experiences, or at least they don't. They have to do that very, very carefully. Do you have recommendations for those kinds of organizations?
I thought COVID provided us an immense kind of blank slate or canvas is a better way to put it, of ways to communicate. The answer is yes. I mean, I think that authenticity became much more important than high level marketing. So taking your iPhone, and by the way, these things are incredible. Taking your iPhone and walking through and say, I want you to see what's going on today in the soup line kitchen, or in the soup line in the kitchen, or in the hospital. I mean, follow privacy rules. I'm not advocating, just throwing everything out the window and people put people's faces on Facebook when it shouldn't be. But there's so much that can be done via video, FaceTime, Zoom. I had a gift officer tell me, and I wish I'd have thought of it so I could have used it as my own, but it's totally stolen, who literally every month, this is an elderly woman who really is cautious of the world today and environment. She has lunch delivered to the woman. She knows how to Zoom, and the exact same lunch is delivered to her, and they have lunch once a month, just like this, the two of them. That's powerful. It's the woman's like, this is one of my best times each month, because I just get to sit for 90 minutes with you like I'm out at a restaurant. It's a blank canvas. Use your imagination. But yes, you can't force someone into a situation where their health or any other issue would preclude that kind of experience. But find a substitute. There's no excuse for not trying to find that substitute.
Yes, and in fact, Rebecca had asked a similar question. So, Rebecca, I hope that you felt that addressed your sentiment as well about entirely remote organizations. This is something actually that's come up a lot in the series, and I thank you, Randall, for illustrating that way. That's such a great example, and I'm sure it's very helpful for the donor. It's helpful for the organization. It drives down costs, which is another one of the things that you just talked about. So, lots of pluses.
I'll throw this just out because I've been talking about this for years. I live in Omaha, Nebraska, which the N here you can see stands for knowledge. That we have snowbirds, and many of you probably do too. And the excuse was, well, I have to go down there, or I lose touch with them. And I'm like, yeah, COVID ended that problem. There is no reason for us to have barriers if we don't want them. The snowbirds are an extreme and a constant. But it's another example of how do we creatively get in front of people and engage them using technology when we have limited resources.
And it's very personal. I mean, this is the other thing during COVID is some people try to just take what was an existing event, let's say some kind of speaker series, and then just deliver it virtually. And there's no harm in that, but that's not the same thing as sitting down one-on-one with somebody for lunch, and that may be the only meal that they have with somebody in the space of a week. That's much more personal.
Absolutely. Particularly things like retirement homes and communities where they're being very careful. Sometimes just a face on a screen can be all the difference in the world.
Right. And then we had a little pushback from Alex. I love this.
Good.
Longer cultivation.
Jay, it's just like my house and my wife. Alex, thank you for coming.
So Alex said, wouldn't longer cultivation times be an argument for keeping prospects in portfolios for longer? And then they referenced how they manage a portfolio of private foundations, many of which are invitation only, and they struggle with how long to cultivate prospective funders and keep them in the portfolio, et cetera, et cetera. You've heard this before. Maybe one of the dimensions of this is there a difference? First of all, it'd be great to hear your thoughts on this specifically, but also if there's a difference between doing this in an institutional versus an individual context. It may only be 5 to 10% of the pie, but it's still part of the pie.
No, Alex, and one of my favorite podcasts is Clark Howard, which is a finance show, and he always talks about, he does a weekly Friday, Clark Stinks, which he takes complaints and like, you got it wrong, and I'm going to take my wrong. Alex, you're right. If you're dealing in private foundations and corporations that have a limited opportunity to engage, meaning there's invitation only, or they only grant in certain cycles, that is absolutely an exception to the rule. And so I applaud you for stepping up and saying, hey, that crazy guy from Nebraska, you're missing a point. You're right. In this case, Randall stinks. You are right. You would hold on to them a little bit longer. But I would advocate something maybe you didn't mention, is private foundations and corporations they themselves don't make gifts. The people in them do. How do you build stronger relationships with those people? Much like what we talked about throughout, but you're right, you would hold on to them for a longer period of time because their cycle is going to be different than someone who can individual who can do it at any one time.
Right. Randall, so grateful for all of this, and also really happy that you're going to be coming back and taking this sort of second shot the same week on planned giving in a down market. That's something that's going to be held on Thursday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern time. So I hope that if you don't have that on your calendar yet, you'll put it on now. You'll register for that so you can join us live and ask questions, be a part of that discussion, maybe even harvest some questions from your colleagues and make that a part of the discussion as well. I also want to just do a shout out because Randall was kind enough to mention, of course, a new book that's being released just next week. It's the launch of a book by Nathan Chappell and Brian Crimmins. That's The Generosity Crisis, and a really interesting book and very, very interesting subject matter. We're going to have a conversation with them live right there in New York. That'll be occurring next Tuesday at 3:30 p.m. So, excuse me, Monday at 3:30 p.m. So I hope you'll join us for that. Another great session in the series. But you can look for that and all the other sessions we do right under the resources tab at DonorSearch.net. And while you're there, I hope you'll take a look just at what they do, because of course, DonorSearch is about your donors. And if one of the lessons today is to do what we do thoughtfully, mindfully, and efficiently, one of the ways to do that, of course, is to know a little bit more about them, where they are, and what they might be willing and able to do. So with that, again, my thanks to you, Randall, for being willing to do this and to come back Thursday as well. Thank you.
Oh, I appreciate it, Jay, and I appreciate you. I appreciate what Bill Tedesco's done in terms of this series and sponsoring it to allow us to talk with each other about how we can make our communities a better place. I'll finish with my favorite Gaelic saying: some people make things happen, some people watch things happen, then there are those who wondered what happened. And we in philanthropy, those who give and those who are the conduits to our nonprofits, Jay, we are people who make things happen for the people and the things in our communities that we are wondering what happened. And I hope people feel like they're making a difference, because we need philanthropy and nonprofits more now than ever.
Wow, couldn't agree with that more. And speaking of making things happen, it is election day. If you haven't voted yet, folks,
Get out and vote.
Go out there and make your voice heard. And then make your voice heard here on Thursday, 3:30 p.m. So we'll see you then. Until then, take care, stay healthy. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jay.
Thank you.